Cold Case, an Angelica Dale Mystery by P.K. Armstrong. Chapter 23. After a day of surveillance and surreptitious conversation with Moira's hair colorist, I strategized my interview with Moira. It seemed she didn't party with friends or shop to relieve the stress from a high-pressure job. She usually went running. The snow for the past 2 days nixed my plan to waylay her on a running path she frequented about 1.2 miles from her home. But the purple-haired hairstylist had given me another idea. It seemed Moira had no problem making her obsession with the Aspen Club known. She had even motivated the city council to create a memorial at the museum. So that is where I would meet her. I called Mr. Winters. Mr. Winters? Angelica Dale. Good morning, Miss Dale, he said breathlessly. How can I help? I was wondering if you could help me arrange a meeting with Moira Adams. Oh, Moira. Well, yes. I think I gave you her number in the copies you took with you. He sounded personally affronted, as if I was implying he left something out. Yes, I know, but I need you to arrange the meeting because I don't want her to know who she will be meeting with. I let the information sink in for a moment. Oh, I could hear him gulp over the phone. Oh, you mean a sting? He whispered loudly. I laughed to myself. Do you think she has something to do with this? I mean, she can't, can she? She wasn't even born, he said, his voice prideful of his deductive reasoning. Truthfully, I lowered my voice in a conspiratorial tone. I suspect Miss Adams knows more about what happened in the days leading up to the fire than she let on. Mr. Winters gasped in shock. I laughed to myself again. I, I, Mr. Winters began stuttering, and I knew he needed reinforcing. Look, Mr. Winters, this isn't just about Moira Adams and her family. This is about a whole community that was horrified watching those young people burn alive in that fire. The feeling of safety and security disappeared that night, and for months afterwards. Then the joint community held its breath, awaiting the trial and hoping for answers, and they didn't get them. The installation you are curating for Osgood is not just a remembrance of the lives lost, but of innocence lost. If with just this small gesture you can help bring answers, should you not swallow your fears and do it? Once again, I fell silent. I could hear Mr. Winter's breath steady, and he sighed. Okay, Miss Dale, what do you need me to do? I headed to the museum late in the afternoon, an hour before closing. After coaching Mr. Winters on what to say, a meeting had been arranged between Moira Adams and Lynn Shaw, a name I frequently used when working undercover. As a cop for long-term assignments, I often used a name closer to my own with the same initials. But as a private investigator, any necessary subterfuge wasn't usually that extensive. So I used my other name, which was a combination of my mom's middle name and her maiden name. The snow had stopped early in the morning and left Osgood and the surrounding county covered in 4 inches of pillow-soft flakes. I pulled into and parked in a cleared museum parking lot and was enthralled. The building was now a snow castle set against a backdrop of ice-covered trees and bushes, its sharp angles collecting the snow, making them more pronounced, causing the building to become a caricature of itself. The glass windows were fogged, but the museum lights were vivid and still filtered through, bouncing off the snow's glossy surface and creating a lighthouse beam effect. Mr. Winters was anticipating my arrival. He hurriedly pushed open the door to let me in and immediately whispered excitedly, She's already here, walking through the exhibit. I nodded and we made our way toward the stairs. I dismissed Winters, who was clearly disappointed, and descended the stairs. The double doors to the room where the exhibit was being staged were open. Winters had clearly been working hard in the days since we first met. The exhibit looked almost complete. I walked in and my eyes quickly made out Moira Adams standing next to a plexiglass display with images of the fire's victims at various stages in their life. Baby pictures, graduation photos, recitals, and other major events in their young lives were dynamically arranged in a powerful way to evoke the emotions of the viewer. Moira turned at the sound of me clearing my throat. I had instructed Winters to tell Moira that Lynn Shaw, that was me, was an independent photographer looking to do a photo series on the fire at the Aspen Club. A young, beautiful visage was needed to be the face of the series, and he had thought of her. Moira was further incentivized by Winters pointing out she was especially qualified because of her scientific background. Not being able to get a read on Moira, I thought it would be wise to appeal to vanity and her smarts. Lynn Shaw? I nodded, but before I could speak, she began. You're older. That explains it. You old people don't realize that all a person has to do is Google someone. You have no online presence whatsoever. Is that even your name? She paused with a smug grin on her face. I just showed up to see what you were up to. She crossed her arms in front of her. I had expected a smart girl like Moira would look me up. I was prepared for it. I feigned horror and immediately began waving my arms as if to stop her from walking out. No, no, please hear me out. I began digging in my bag in an erratic fashion as if I was worried she was going to leave. I pulled out an application form and printed pages from the internet, just like the old person she expected me to be, and shoved them at her. I began my backstory, which I had scrambled to put together the night before. There is this contest for amateur photographers aged 25 to 35. The rules are to present a photographic series portraying an event that changed a whole community. The subject should be about inclusivity, victims' rights, children, or health and science. The winner receives $25,000 and a scholarship to the prestigious Maryland Institute College of Art. I stepped closer as if I was going to grab her in earnest. She stepped back. Please, I've always wanted to be a photographer. When I read about the story, I just knew I wanted it for my entry. I looked at her with what I hoped was desperation. She looked at me, her eyes narrowed as if she was trying to look through to my soul. I waited. She sighed and looked away from me, back to the images on the board. What, so you want to take pictures of me or something? I had her. No, not right now. I was hoping to just talk about the fire and your family's life afterward. It will give me a better idea how to stage the photographs later. What do you want to know? Something made you get involved in the exhibit. Was it because you lost your aunt? Moira shrugged. I guess. Of course, my mom was just a baby when Sasha died. But her mom and dad, my grandparents, never got over it. I gestured to some chairs that were in a corner and we sat down. They were cold and distant, even as time passed. They cared for my mom, made sure she had a place to live, fed her, clothed her, but they didn't love her like a daughter. She was just a responsibility. Of course, later on, my mom realized the reason behind the wall they created. She would talk about it sometimes. I nodded in encouragement. How do you think your childhood was affected? My mom could be just as cold as my grandparents sometimes. They would tell her how driven Sasha was and told her all she became was a wife and mother. Sometimes she would tell me I'm pretty, so all I'll ever be is on some man's arm. Moira bristled a bit, and frankly, I didn't blame her. Your parents were supposed to be the first people in life that believed you could do anything, not tear you down until you were so insecure you couldn't move. Something triggered in my mind, and I ventured a question. It sounds like your grandparents were impressed with Sasha? I don't blame them. Sasha was going places. She was beautiful, but downplayed her looks. She felt people would take her more seriously. She wanted to have her own business, like a restaurant or bar. She wanted it to be big, but not here in Osgood. She wanted to go to a big city like Chicago, New York, LA, or Miami. She was real smart with money. She could have made it happen. Everyone knew it. That is why my grandparents gave her the money. Moira's voice had become louder and her eyes had widened. She looked not just like a proud relative, but a fan? And there goes that little radar in the back of my head. I pictured her mother and grandparents speaking every now and again about the indomitable Sasha. Keepsakes would include a box of her things. What struck me is that Moira was speaking as if she knew her aunt intimately. How could that be? I got up and paced around the room to avoid her gaze. And then the answer struck me forcefully. I wiped all expression from my face and turned and smiled at Moira. I think I have enough to start. I'm going to go back to my hotel and make some notes and then start planning my photos. Can I call you? Yeah, sure, I guess. Moira shrugged again and gave me her number. As I left the room, she had started staring at the pictures again and was lost in thought.